Sometimes the reading journey we start is not the same reading journey we conclude. I discovered that last year when I read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, Charlotte Bronte's Shirley, and Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South together in one reading project. And I'd like to take you through that process with me in this video. Welcome back to my BookTube channel, in which I share not just my love of reading, but also specific ways I like to read, which I've found really rewarding and useful. I hope you find these ideas helpful in your own reading journeys. In a previous video, I gave a quick overview of what I like to call the rule of 3+1, and I promised that I would go into more detail about the last Austen-Bronte-Gaskell cycle. Full disclosure, when I started Pride and Prejudice this year, it was meant to be a standalone read, or to be more accurate, a standalone reread, as I had read it 3 times before. But I enjoyed it so much and got a lot out of it this 4th time around that I wanted to extend the reading project by reading related books. One of the key things that really stood out for me in this reading was the theme of women's agency. They just don't have much agency, do they? And I mean that the most a woman can decide for herself in the world of Pride and Prejudice is which man to marry. The most control she has is over which proposals she rejects and which proposals she accepts. And you're probably thinking now of Mr. Collins' proposal to Lizzie and Mr. Darcy's subsequent proposals to her as well. But what stood out for me this time was that Lizzie would have really welcomed a proposal from Mr. Wickham before she knew about his character, of course. And she would have also really liked being courted and proposed to by Colonel Fitzwilliam. Unfortunately, both of them made it very clear to her that they were younger sons who could not follow their hearts and had to marry for money. And that must have been really disappointing. Not just because, it's bad enough to be told that you're not romantically desirable, but it gets even worse when you realize there is nothing you can do about it. There was nothing Elizabeth could do to make herself more attractive to a good man who just needed to be practical when choosing a wife. What she did have was what I would like to call an agency of mind, which meant she was able to hear Mr. Darcy's criticisms of her and to amend her behavior. We see the same virtue in Mr. Darcy when she criticized him and he changed for the better. And so they were able to go for their happy ending. They did the inner work that was necessary to deserve that happy ending. Or did they? They actually almost did not end up together. And I'm so sorry to say this because I love Lizzie so much this 4th time around, but she almost drops the ball. No, wait, she does. She does drop the ball. And guess who picks it up? But first, remember that the reason Mr. Darcy separated Mr. Bingley and Jane was that he carefully studied Jane's behavior and did not see any partiality towards his friend. And Mr. Bingley had already almost fallen prey to a gold digger before Jane. And then here is Mrs. Bennet, Jane's mother, who is already bragging about how much money Jane is going to have when she marries Mr. Bingley. What else could Mr. Darcy conclude? Maybe if Jane, who really did not seem to be like her mother, had shown that she was also falling for Mr. Bingley, he would have backed off. But he really did not see any signs that Jane reciprocated, so he separated them. Well, the night that Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth meet again for the first time after Darcy has rescued Lydia, she makes the same mistake as Jane. She's so embarrassed that she does not speak to him all night. She barely acknowledges his existence, and he is forced to conclude that she really does not care for him, that her feelings from the time he made his first proposal did not change. And being a true gentleman, he decides to go away and not bother her anymore. She really almost lost him. And if it were not for Lady Catherine de Bourgh barging in, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy would not have their happy ending. I'm going to go out on a limb now and say that this wasn't just some ex machina device. This was an integral part of Jane Austen's social commentary, because Lady Catherine de Bourgh, as the daughter of an earl and the widow of a possible baronet, had the most money of any woman in this novel, which meant she had the most agency. And she must have exercised some agency for herself when choosing her husband. And now that she's even wealthier than she was when she got married, she is exercising that romantic agency on Elizabeth's behalf, though not in a way that she wanted to. I'm sure she would have wanted to exercise more of it on her daughter's behalf. But here we see the idea that economic agency is very close to romantic agency, and that a woman with a lot of wealth can decide not just her own romantic future, but also the romantic futures of other women. As I've said, I enjoyed Pride and Prejudice so much more this fourth time around that I wanted to extend the reading. And the first thing I did was revisit Charlotte Bronte's criticism of it. What she wrote, and I quote, "It is an accurate, daguerreotyped portrait of a commonplace face, a carefully fenced, highly cultivated garden, with neat borders and delicate flowers, but no glance of a bright, vivid physiognomy. No open country, no fresh air, no blue hill, no bonny beck. I should hardly like to live with her ladies and gentlemen in their elegant but confined houses." I actually think this was a fair assessment. All Jane Austen's characters are in elegant but confined houses, which is to say, elegant but confined circumstances. And there are very careful boundaries around the highly cultivated social mores. If Bronte says that their faces are not vivid, that's a matter of taste. And because the ball is in her court now, I wanted to let her show me what her idea of a desirable physiognomy in fiction was. So when I learned that she wrote her novel Shirley the same year she read Pride and Prejudice, I was very eager to read that as my follow-up to Pride and Prejudice. To be clear, Shirley is not a direct rebuttal to Pride and Prejudice. It stands on its own, but reading it with Pride and Prejudice in this reading project was really illuminating, because they have some very stark contrasts, but also one very crucial thing in common. So firstly, did you know that Pride and Prejudice was set during the Napoleonic Wars and the Industrial Revolution? Did you know that it was a wartime novel? Probably not. Okay, the regiments are there, but they're only so much romantic wallpaper for Kitty and Lydia. Shirley does not let the characters or the readers distance themselves or forget current events. It is very clear throughout the novel that an unpopular war being fought abroad is draining the country's lifeblood, and that meanwhile clashes between mill owners and workers are ripping apart what's left of English society. The fact that the Bennets and the other characters of Pride and Prejudice were able to ignore this, the fact that there was no shadow over the story hinting that Wickham might go abroad to fight and never come back home, kind of backs up Bronte's criticism that Pride and Prejudice was a carefully fenced-in, cultivated garden that had nothing to do with the real world. But it's not their differences that I find fascinating, but the one thing they have in common, which is that they both address women's agency. What I find fascinating about Shirley, and what I would have found fascinating about it if I had read it as a standalone, is that it acknowledges that early 19th century England was very much a man's world, but there were women in it too, and this was the women's experience. This was what it was like to be a woman in a world where men just did not take you seriously. It was, in many parts, very saddening, in some parts quite infuriating, and in a few parts, really fascinating. I liked seeing how women with passion and intelligence found a way to get their way, which was not limited to marriage. We also see the relationship between economic agency and romantic agency in the lives of the two main women characters, Caroline Helstone and Shirley Keeldar. Caroline has no dowry, and she's completely dependent on her uncle. Meanwhile, Shirley, an heiress, is so wealthy that she is easily able to lend somebody £5,000, which Austen lovers will know immediately was equivalent to Mr. Bingley's annual income. That's a lot of money. Can you guess which of these two women has more agency in love? But Shirley does not limit women to romantic agency. It also shows that they can have moral agency. There's an interesting scene in which Shirley is confronted by a minor character who's a man after she has lent the money to the mill owner who is pretty desperate and who has really needed this loan. And the other character basically accuses her of having lent him the money only because she has a crush on him. And she finds that very insulting because a woman can want to do a good deed for someone and can want to help someone who needs help without it being because she's desperate to get married. She can just be virtuous. And in that sense, she's no different from the men in the story who, when they hear that the mill is going to be attacked violently in the middle of the night, ride out with their firearms to help the mill owner defend his property. Would we have said that those men who were helping out a neighbor were only doing so because they had a crush on him? We would never say that. So why are we suddenly saying it about a woman? And I think here Bronte was satirizing how men really saw women in that day and age. And the really interesting and I guess frustrating part is that the man who accused Shirley of doing a good deed just because she was attracted to a man, he wasn't a jerk. He wasn't a chauvinist. He was, in other respects, a really good man, a good neighbor to have, a pillar of the community. He just did not think much of women. For all the realism in Shirley, however, I actually find the romantic ending less realistic than Jane Austen's romantic ending, though I don't think I want to go into that much here. So let's move on. I also enjoyed Shirley so much that I wanted to extend its reading as much as I wanted to extend Pride and Prejudice's reading. So when I remembered that Elizabeth Gaskell and Charlotte Brontë had been good friends, I decided to read a novel by Gaskell. And what better novel than North and South? North and South is actually an excellent companion novel to Shirley because they are both about virtuous but poor young women who fall in love with struggling, embattled mill owners. I mentioned that Bronte and Gaskell were good friends. I feel that North and South and Shirley are also good friends. These two books are besties. Moreover, if Shirley takes a stand for the moral agency of women, North and South takes the same stand for the moral agency of men in a different way. So John Thornton is the mill owner, and there's a scene in which he is going to a worker's house to tell the worker that he has decided to hire the guy. And when he enters, Margaret, whom he is in love with, is standing there. And you'd think that he'd be really happy to see her, but no, he's not. He's annoyed. That's because this particular worker was someone whom everyone would have recommended Thornton not hire. The worker was a union leader who had encouraged all the other men to strike, and because of that, he was blacklisted in all the mills. And he was just not a good bet for an employee. But Thornton did extra research. He let his mind be changed by not just what he learned about the worker, but also his own interactions with the man when he was asking honestly and openly for a chance. And he decided, okay, I will take a chance on you. I believe that you're a good person and that you'll be a good employee. So when he sees that Margaret is friends with the worker's family, he becomes annoyed because he realizes people will think that he hired the worker just because he was sweet on Margaret. And that was not the case. If a woman can do a good deed without there being a man whom she has a crush on, a man can also do a good deed without there being a woman that he's sweet on. The men don't need women to soften them in order to be kind. Men can just be kind because they are also virtuous. And I don't know if this was a revolutionary or unpopular idea during Elizabeth Gaskell's time, but it was very interesting to read that perspective in North and South. It would also be interesting to compare the ending of Pride and Prejudice to the ending of North and South. But since the second novel is not as popular and well known as the first, I don't want to go into it too much. Suffice it to say that it takes the wielding of wealth by a woman for these two characters, John and Margaret, to come together at last. Economic agency equals romantic agency, also in this happy ending. So those are the three novels, and I would have stopped at 3 for a rule of 3 when I remembered that there is another Victorian novel that also has a mill in it. The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. And I thought, well, what better novel to transition me from this reading project, especially since I found out it was deliberately set right after the Napoleonic Wars. Excellent, a bridge from these 3 books to whatever else I might want to read afterwards. It turned out to be kind of a poor call. Firstly, the mill in this story is not a steam-powered textile mill. It's an old-fashioned water mill that grinds flour. And secondly, this is not a romantic novel. George Eliot also acknowledges that women did not have much economic agency or romantic agency, and that the former often decided the latter. But Although she presents this as a problem, she does not suggest that the resolution comes through courtship and marriage. She's doing something else. In fact, she's suggesting that true resolution is not possible while women are held back. There's a lot more symbolism in The Mill on the Floss than in the previous three novels. The steady river Floss, which rarely overflows its banks, is a symbol for the passage of time and the inevitability of fate, but I also think it mirrors the inner life of Maggie Tulliver. It's a very rich inner life, which I'm sure she would love to have flow in a direction of her own choosing, but no, it is forced to flow in very conventional channels. She has very deep emotions and passions and thoughts and dreams, but they have nowhere to go. Influenced by the previous three novels, of course, we wonder, would they have somewhere to go if she had money? And The Mill on the Floss seems to say that kind of question is actually vulgar. Pride and Prejudice, Shirley and North and South get to have happy endings because the women get some access to money. And these novels are not shy about naming figures. 5,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds, 1,857 pounds. Yes, that specific figure is in North and South. What makes The Mill on the Floss different is that it suggests a true happy ending is not through the wedding of economic agency and romantic agency. Courtship and marriage are not the right resolution. It suggests that the real solution or the real relationship is not that of husband and wife, but that of brother and sister. So there you have it, the rule of 3+1. 3 books which are related and which show the same theme at very different angles, and 1 book which stands as a contrast to them. By reading all of these together, I felt that I got so much more out of them than I would have if I had read them as standalones. And that is why I would like to repeat this formula again this coming year. I will be doing the Austen Bronte Gaskell cycle again in a few months, but I'm going to be starting with a different one, with speculative fiction. So I'll be reading H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Michael Crichton, and I'm going to find a +1 for these 3. If you find that interesting, I hope you will join me.